Welcome, wrestling fans. You got the show. Bill Schuyler here at One Wrestling Presents Hustle and Show Goes Old School. I'm joined with my tag team partner, Billy Ray Valentine, and a special guest, the Professor. Forget Mike Tenay. This is Professor Quintana, and he knows it all. Anything you want to know about professional wrestling, this man is the actual brain of the grappling game.
Hey, what's going on, everybody, man? It's Billy Ray Valentine, 1WRESTLING.com. Cover the WWE. He already introduced our man Quintana here, but today on Old School, One Wrestling Goes Old School, we're going to talk about Verne Gagne and the AWA. With the passing of Verne Gagne, we thought it was only appropriate that we discuss this on our maiden episode, our first episode back in a long time. You know, we wanted to talk some old school, and you don't get any more old school than Verne and the AWA. What did you guys think about the passing of Verne Gagne? I mean, I'm sure you guys have a lot of fond memories of the AWA and a lot of fond memories of Verne wrestling and the people that he groomed and what he did for the business. Professor, what do you think?
You know what? Rest in peace, Verne Gagne, one of the pioneers of professional wrestling. And in my opinion, the first larger-than-life wrestling character that was on TV, because if it wasn't for Verne Gagne and his deals in Chicago with the Dumont Network, I mean, wrestling went to another level because of Verne Gagne and being on television. So, you know, he had a very important, legacy in the wrestling industry. And also, too, as a businessman himself, having dealing with the politics of the National Wrestling Alliance and their stranglehold of the monopoly in the United States, if it wasn't for Verne Gagne separating himself to create the AWA, then Vince McMahon Sr. wouldn't have separated and created the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. My man, Bill Schuyler, what do you think of Verne Gagne?
Verne Gagne was, without a doubt, one of the greatest wrestling minds in professional wrestling history. Throughout the 70s, primarily, I think he was really almost untouched by the other promoters across the country. His eye for talent and being able to cultivate that talent was just really unbelievable. And he was, on top of that, a excellent professional athlete, a amateur athlete, a former Olympian. And as far as if you want to get into and see if you never have one of the greatest scientific matches of all time would be Verne Gagne going up against England's Billy Robinson. That was just such a phenomenal feud that they actually made a movie about it called The Wrestler, not to be confused, of course, with Mickey Rourke's movie. But this was, back, in the early 70s, and it really, truly showed the world what pro wrestling could be. And it was, there's nothing really bad I can say about Verne other than the fact that, he was a very stubborn man, and unfortunately, much like a lot of the promoters of his generation, did not see that writing on the wall come the 80s when things were changing, which due to MTV and just all kinds of things. And the guy that pretty much ended things for him, Vincent Kennedy McMahon, had that vision, and that's something we'll get into as we discuss this.
Well, Verne Gagne was 89. He passed at the age of 89, and throughout the wrestling world, everybody kept talking about his legacy. I am not a big AWA guy, not because I'm not a wrestling fan, just because I'm a little bit too young to know about that, and I didn't experience that like others would. Everybody keeps saying that Verne Gagne was probably one of the greatest promoters, if not the greatest promoter in the history of the wrestling game. How accurate do you guys think that is? Bill, real quick, and then we'll go to the professor.
Again, I would say that throughout the 70s, yes. Come the 80s, he had lost touch and was stuck in the 70s, and that aspect of his brilliance met a brick wall that he was just unable to go through, up, over, or around.
Professor.
Well, if you guys ever see the WWE version of that video, the spectacular legacy of the AWA, it actually shows like Verne's territory map of how big the AWA was back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He had Chicago, Milwaukee. He had parts of Canada. He had parts of California and the San Francisco area. So he had great territories, excellent television in those markets. And that's why, in my opinion, he was the #1 promoter and had the #1 promotion in the 60s and 70s, head to head with the NWA, because the NWA, of course, like I said before, with the monopoly, everybody in the United States knows the NWA territory, in my opinion. I mean, everybody might say the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, you had to go to Madison Square Garden for the money. That is true. But again, like I said, the AWA had a lot of territory in the Midwest and out in the West. And of course, everybody knows where the NWA went. So again, Verne Gagne's legacy as a promoter, a businessman, a former 10-time champion. As Bill Schuyler said, his matches, you know, I say his greatest feuds is with Nick Bockwinkel. He's had classics, 1 hour draw matches, 1 hour matches with Nick Bockwinkel. They traded wins against each other. And I believe his 10th and last AWA World Heavyweight title win was actually against Nick Bockwinkel in the early 80s, if I'm not mistaken, Bill. If you want to correct me on that, I'm not too sure. But that's when he won the title and retired at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. Two of the most underrated wrestlers, I think, of all time, who were holders of world titles and led their companies, would be Verne and Tricky Nick Bockwinkel. A lot of people have no idea who Nick Bockwinkel even is, and it's a shame, because he was not only brilliant in the ring, his vocabulary, his intelligence that he portrayed, his character on the stick was unmatchable, and he was willing to wrestle and did wrestle everybody and anybody, including a young Hulk Hogan. That were matches that most people thought that it was impossible for anybody to beat a man of the Hulkster's size. And even at that time, he was not the Hulkster. He was the incredible Hulk Hogan in the AWA. But, yeah, with that and Verne on his own, as always, you get the people's, it's his own company. He booked himself as champion, but he didn't lay down in the ring. He didn't do anything but wrestle his ass off every night. I mean, you're talking, again, like you said, with Bockwinkel doing 45-minute, hour Broadways, draws. I mean, we're talking every night of the week. Just tremendous wrestling that, unfortunately, a lot of people have never had the opportunity to see, and a lot of it has probably been lost in footage or was not recorded because they were on house shows.
Well, they would also say that a lot of people have said that Nick Bockwinkel, Verne Gagne was fixated on having a true technician in the ring be the AWA champion. That's what he wanted. He wanted the person to represent his company to be a real professional wrestler. And that's part of the reason why, while they had the greatest professional wrestler, well, you can argue that, but definitely one of the top 2, top 3 greatest professional wrestlers of all time, Hulk Hogan, on their roster, they weren't able to capitalize on that. And they weren't able to do what Vince McMahon did with him, because Verne said that Hulk Hogan wasn't a pure wrestler, and therefore he could not put the title on him. He couldn't put the AWA title on him. Now, I want to talk about the prestige of the AWA title. What type of prestige did that title carry? From what I understand, there were three major companies in America at that time, and it was the WWE, then the WWF or the WWF, the NWA, and the AWA. So if you were holding one of those titles, you were considered to be the man, like almost the equivalent of the WWF and WCW at the time. What do you guys think of the prestige of that AWA title? How prestigious was it? And was it more prestigious than the WWF title at any point?
I'll jump in on this. I think that's a title, again, and a promotion that was vastly overlooked. I think up until the end of 1983, that AWA title was a title that was defended worldwide, nationwide, of course. They went everywhere, Japan, Germany. They were not their champions, whether it be Bockwinkel or Gagne, wrestled other world champions throughout Europe and Asia. The only other company that matched that was the NWA. The WWF always primarily was U.S. based, some leaps into Canada and the like, but it took them a long time to actually take that step into going into an actual worldwide defense of their title. And I never really think that they gave it a shot, and they definitely didn't wrestle as a company against, because they never recognized other companies. You wouldn't see them going up against, as Hogan had, Antonio Inoki, and recognizing as I believe would have been All Japan at the time, or Otto, German Otto Wants in Germany, and things like that. Just because they would say, "Oh, he wrestled this great wrestler from Germany, etc." But it was never a title on the line. Primarily when the WWF and the WWF, and even today the WWE, when they go to another country, they're only wrestling within their roster. Where you do get other companies, WCW had done it, the NWA had done it, Impact Wrestling does it to a degree where they will go to foreign countries and bring in local champions and stars and wrestle with them and promote them on their show as a homegrown talent from wherever they are. And that's always a gripe I've had with the WWF, that in claiming to be world champions, they seem to always be afraid to go up against that wrestling champion from another organization, even if it was to end up in a time decision or a draw. I don't expect them to give the title to another one, unlike other promotions who did, and it worked out very well for them, especially NWA, Ric Flair, situations like that where they would exchange that and then have an interpromotional feud with those countries. WWF is very shy when it comes to recognizing and definitely having an interpromotional. They did do that back in the 70s with the territories, where you would have, say, Bob Backlund going up against Ric Flair or whoever the other champion may be, always usually winding up in a time limit draw or the like. But, I digress. Professor, what are your opinions on that?
Well, the legacy of the AWA Championship, goes back to when Verne Gagne had his issues with the NWA promoters. He and Lou Thez, back, I believe, in the mid to late 50s, were going against each other for the NWA championship. Luthez was the champion at that time, and Verne Gagne and Luthez fought hour matches, 2 out of 3 fall matches. They had, as Bill Schuyler would say, those Broadway type matches. And Verne was frustrated with the NWA promoters because the NWA promoters were afraid that if Verne had the NWA title, that he was going to, as they said, he was going to hold it hostage in the Chicago area. And so this is why, again, like I said, Verne Gagne is a great businessman, a great visionary to create his own promotion and spearhead the AWA. And like I said, if it wasn't for Verne Gagne splitting away from the NWA monopoly, there would be no Worldwide Wrestling Federation, which would be World Wrestling Entertainment. Now, so, Verne Gagne is very important on that.
On that point, that we all know that a lot of AWA talent jumped ship to the WWE. The biggest and most notable name being Hulk Hogan. He was an AWA talent, and then he went over to the WWE, WWF at the time, which skyrocketed his career to another level. How many wrestlers? I mean, I can name a few. I can name actually like Bobby Heenan, who went over to the WWF, the Rockers, the Midnight Rockers, the Iron Sheik, Sergeant Slaughter, Mr. Perfect. There are much more, and I'll let you guys get into that. But when they left the AWA for the WWE, we know what type of impact that made. How was Verne Gagne able to stay afloat after that mass exodus of talent to the WWE? Professor, you want to take that one?
Oh, sure. I'll take it, Billy Ray. To combat the raid, as you would like to call it, where Vince McMahon acquired all those great AWA talents like Jesse Ventura, Mean Gene Okerlund, Bobby the Brain Heenan, the list goes on and on. Verne Gagne had a kind of like a working relationship with certain people in the NWA, the Crockett's and the people in Florida like Billy Graham. And Verne Gagne wanted to start like an interpromotional type of relationship with the NWA. And Bill Schuyler, do you remember those shows? I think it was called, what was it, USA Pro Wrestling, where it was AWA and NWA talent.
Yep.
That they were going weekly, trying to go against the WWE shows. But as Billy Ray, me and Bill Schuyler were talking behind the scenes. Verne Gagne's stubbornness. He wanted to be the head chef in the pot. How can you have relationships with Jim Crockett or Jerry Jarrett? He wants his guys to be number one. He wants his organization to be number one. And of course, NWA wants their guys to be number one and, their organization to be number one. It was a great concept at the time. And because of that, they had a great show called Super Clash in 1985, which went against WrestleMania 1. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was in Comiskey Park, either in September or October of 1985, to try to go against WrestleMania. And that card, if you really want to talk about that, that was a stacked card from top to bottom of talent. You had 2 heavyweight title matches, the AWA title match with Stan Hansen against Rick Martel. You had the NWA heavyweight championship with Ric Flair against Magnum TA. You even had Kerry Von Erich from World Class going against Jimmy Garvin. So you had a stacked roster, but of course, like I said, too many chefs and not enough Indians to go against the common enemy, and that common enemy was Vince McMahon. Bill, what do you want to say?
Yeah,
Real quick. Give your thoughts on this, and then we're gonna move on to whatever we think is our each of us our top 3 of wrestlers that moved over from the AWA to the WWE. All right.
Yep, without a doubt, it was a case of egos. You had the likes of Gagne, you had Jerry Lawler, you had Jerry Jarrett, you had Eddie Graham down in Florida, you had the Crockett's involved, and everybody wanted, again, like you said, their guy to be the main champion. They wanted theirs, and if they just could have done away with the egos, they could have taken back the the nation and dominated the WWF at that time. The Superclass shows were some of the best pay-per-views. If they were, some of them were, some of them weren't, but they were outstanding.
The first one was
shows, and that aired. And that one aired. They had that show came out literally, I think, 2 months after WrestleMania 1, and just as Starrcade was always, in my opinion, for many years, better than WrestleMania when it came down to just the pure wrestling, because that's what it was. They had none of the big celebrities and Liberace's and Aretha Franklin's and the like coming in. It was strictly just stat cards with championship matches of belts of every promotion they could get their hands on.
Hey, Bill, would you say it's akin to Ring of Honor today? Would you think that would you say that Ring of Honor is a good description of the type of wrestling? Not it's been taken to another level with Ring of Honor, but the type of wrestling that Ring of Honor does, is it a decent comparison to the AWA?
Yeah, it's Ring of Honor. Where Ring of Honor is that, for all intents and purposes, it's wrestling from bell to bell throughout the entire show. They they never used to work on promos at all. They're beginning to actually kind of work that aspect in, which is very important in this day and age. You got to have your guys be able to have personalities, which the Ring of Honor was always known for not having any personality when it came to guys. They just wrestled, which is great. Ring of Honor's main problem, I will tell you, which didn't happen in AWA, was they knew how to sell. You didn't have 1,000 super kicks and giant finishers with everybody kicking out of everything and nobody being able to be destroyed.
I know I'm going to lose this argument with both of you, but I rather enjoy strong style. I like the no sell when it's done right.
Got to be done right.
Yeah, I like it when it's done right. The professor echoes what you say on a regular basis, by the way. Anyway, go right ahead.
Yeah. My opinion when it comes to that and get down to is this. You could do the greatest spots, do all the spot monkey things you want to do, because I love that too. There's nothing like that fast-paced roller coaster ride matches. But when it comes down to and this is that WWE's guilty of this, Ring of Honor's guilty of this, Impact is, the industry, and this all came about through the Monday Night Wars because everybody was trying to outdo everybody, is if a man has a finisher that he's built up to be his finisher, you don't kick out of that finisher. Otherwise, it's just useless. And it steals away so much power and ring psychology. Going back in the day, a Magnum TA, his finisher was a belly-to-belly suplex that nobody could get up from. They'll do 500 belly-to-belly suplexes in one match today. Not to mention they've already went through 25 tables and chairs and everything else you could think of. But I just think that if you're developing and working it out, a man's finisher should be his finisher. Yes, occasionally maybe he'll be able to get that shoulder up at the last second, but primarily that finisher is going to end him. So when you go back to AWA, that was old school. Those guys wrestled. There was no BS in between in the ring. Because you had guys, from everything from Ivan Koloff and superstar Billy Graham back in the day, all the way up to your Rick Martells, your Stan Hansens, your Larry Sabiscos, young guys, the Midnight Rockers of Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. And these guys put on phenomenal matches, and it was just great great wrestling. And that's a whole story for another multiple episodes to discuss.
Down the road.
Yes, down the road of what needs to be curtailed in the business to get things back on track.
Okay, but
Billy Ray, Billy Ray, if I just say one quick thing, the only person to ever kick out of moves back in the good old days is only Hulk Hogan, but that's it.
Yes,
and he could do that because he was Hulk Hogan. And on that
Hulk
note,
Hogan.
I just want to give, we should talk about who we thought were the biggest defections and that went on to superstardom with the WWE and took the WWE, the WWF, whatever you want to call it, to another stratosphere, to another level, to making them the biggest wrestling company ever. Can I start?
You started, sir.
Then I'll
go ahead, my brother.
Then I'll
start out with your number 3 and work down to 1.
What if I want to start at 1 and work to 3?
Hey, any way you want it, Billy Ray. Any way you want it.
Look, brother, we're going to do this the right way. You got to build up the anticipation.
All right,
so you want to get your money shot.
All right, so number 3, right? I'm going to say Bobby Heenan. And this is why I'm saying Bobby Heenan, okay? The guy was magic on the mic, right? So as a kid, what I remember is Bobby Heenan doing commentary. It's just the most hilarious things I've ever heard in my life. Not to mention that he played the mouthpiece for so many WWE heels at the time, putting them over. These guys didn't have to cut promos. Bobby Heenan did that for them. The Heenan family elevated guys to another level when they were associated with Bobby Heenan. This guy was crucial in the WWE in the early 80s, throughout the 80s, in my opinion. And his feud with Hogan was bigger than actual wrestlers' feuds with Hogan. Everybody wanted to see Hogan get at Bobby Heenan, and he would put a wrestler in the way. So this is why I think Bobby Heenan would take number 3 out of everybody that defected, and there were a lot. Number 2 would have to be Shawn Michaels, and I'm not going to say the Midnight Rockers. I mean, even though the Rockers did play a big part in the WWE, I'm going to say Shawn Michaels because we all know what he ended up becoming, Mr. WrestleMania, the best wrestler in ring, arguably in America that we've ever seen. I mean, there's a few names that we can put in that: Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels. You know what I mean? He's my favorite in ring performer and
showstopper,
and
Mr. WrestleMania,
definitely. And he came straight out of the AWA, you know what I mean? And so at the time, it may not have looked like a huge defection, but later on, we would learn to see that it was a key defection.
One of the biggest.
One to carry the WWE from years to come. And, of course, number 1 is Hulk Hogan. I mean, and I still can't – and I guess this serves as tribute to Vince McMahon because he saw it. I mean, now in retrospect, hindsight is 20/20. We can say, how did he miss that? How did Verne not see the potential of a Hulk Hogan? Why couldn't he get over the classic image of what a wrestler was supposed to be and put the strap on Hulk Hogan and ride Hulk Hogan as the face of his company, maybe taking the AWA to a different level, maybe allowing the AWA to have more of a lifespan than what they did if they had Hulk Hogan be that man, right? But they didn't. They let him go. And he went over to the WWE, and the rest was history. The greatest wrestler of all time, not in the ring, but altogether. And the guy is just my favorite. He's the reason I'm sitting here talking to you right now. Love Hulk Hogan. So he had to be the biggest defection from the AWA to the WWF, WWE later on. I heard he's trying to wrestle in WrestleMania 32. The guy just will not stop.
I hope for his sake that he does not. He could be ringside with his guy, maybe as a manager, but the Hulkster to take any kind of serious bump.
One more time. Hogan versus Flair
at
WrestleMania 32. Hogan versus Sting at 32.
I don't want to see Hulk Hogan in a wheelchair.
Hogan versus Triple H at 32. Hogan goes over.
That works for me. Works for me.
Triple H don't put over anybody in WrestleMania.
Yeah, just think about that. Professor.
The shovel, baby.
Professor, then Bill, okay? Good.
Got it.
Well, for me, I have a Mountain Rushmore. To me, they're all equal. There is no 3-2-1s for me.
Very nice.
So I'm going to go like this. Mean Gene Okerlund, Jesse Ventura, Bobby the Brain Heenan, and Hulk Hogan. all those guys spearheaded what WWE became. Mean Gene, great sideline announcer, interviewing all the wrestlers. As Billy Ray said about Bobby the Brain Heenan, a great manager, and basically took the torch from Captain Lou Albano. And you got Hulk Hogan being the man that he is, the legacy, the icon as he's called, and hopefully Hogan in WrestleMania 32. Viagra on the pole match or whatever, and Jesse Ventura. And Jesse Ventura, a lot of people forget about that. When his injuries, became too much, Vince McMahon had the foresight to put him in the commentator's role. And of course, history has been made because, today, every wrestler who can't really go anymore is now a commentator right now. So if it wasn't for Jesse Ventura, if it wasn't for Vince McMahon, having that foresight of having that heel type commentator to give the other perspective, to give the villain side, to say, evil is good, as Dark Helmet would say in Spaceballs.
You gotta be kidding me, Vince. I know that was pretty bad, but that's what he said. Anyway, go ahead.
But that's my Mount Rushmore.
All right, cool.
That's my Mount Rushmore of all defections from the AWA to WWE. My man Bill Scholar.
I will tell you, yes, Jesse Ventura is a man whose career was cut short way too soon. And his was not even ring related. It came from his serving as a U.S. SEAL, and from his deep dives had developed blood clots in his lungs, and that's what kept him out of the ring. Eventually, otherwise, it was something where he would have died. But he became one of the greatest commentators for wrestling. Not only being a great one for the WWF, he then transferred over to WCW, and in my opinion, became even bigger as an important sidekick to Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone. But with that, I digress. Now, you snuck in a fourth guy on us.
I'm sorry.
For your Mount Rushmore, so that means I'm going to have to come up with a fourth guy. But I would have to say, without a doubt, and going in, who could it be? There's a lot of guys. I'll tell you straight up, my honorable mention would be a young, soon-to-be, absolutely perfect Curt Hennig. He was a very good wrestler in the AWA, but when he got to the WWF and they allowed that perfect character develop from his very own ego, because that's how Curt was, and Vince was able to always recognize guys who, that's what always made a wrestler great, was if they could just amp you up from your regular persona, if you had that kind of dynamic, and shoot it, like I always say, not even to 10, but to 12. Perfect was another one. Again, tragically cut short in his career due to an early demise. But my number 3 is the showstopper, the
headliner,
the main event, Mr. WrestleMania, Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid. Without a doubt, who would have thought back then, looking at him when he was with the Rockers, that they would, one, just not ever just remain a tag team, that one of them would actually become so talented in the ring, and not only in the ring, but behind the scenes, and be such a political, just able to run the business and get things to go his way, and start and end many wrestlers' careers due to the fact of whether they pissed him off or not, or didn't do what he wanted to do, or tried to outshine him. And he had the stroke, and a lot of guys paid the price for it. But Shawn Michaels, number 3. Number 2, without a doubt, the greatest manager in the history of professional wrestling. I have no qualms about that with anyone. Bobby the Brain Heenan, who had the Bobby Heenan family in the AWA, had his feuds with Hulk Hogan in the AWA, and when he came to the WWF, the Brain remained, created a new family, brought in some old members of that family. And Bobby was not only talented in the ring as a wrestler, which a lot of people don't realize, which is why, as a manager, he was able to take such tremendous bumps and be involved in so many great angles that most managers couldn't. And again, as an announcer, he was just the best. I mean, hilarious, knew what was going on. A damn shame for him with the cancer that has robbed him of his ability to speak. But Bobby was loved by everyone. He's one of the most over guys in the business. If you hear stories about him, they're just fantastic. And without a doubt, you just cannot argue the fact that the immortal Hulk Hogan was the number one defector from the AWA to the WWF. He, as much as I am a Ric Flair fan, and when you get to the total, in the ring, on the mic, yes, Ric Flair hands down, but Hulk Hogan transcended professional wrestling. He became a living superhero, cartoons, and anything you could think of. Hulk Hogan was there. He's known throughout the world. You go anywhere and you mention Hulk Hogan, they know who you're talking about. To this day, with a man that hasn't truly been in the real spotlight for many years, Hulk Hogan is just, Hulkamania was untouchable. And the career transcended more. He left WWF, reinvigorated his career by turning heel into Hollywood Hogan. And you just got to say, Verne really missed the boat in not giving the man the little bit of money. He wasn't asking for that much more, and the ability to be the number one guy in the company, taking that from Tricky Nick Bockwinkel at the time. Nick was getting older. His time had passed. Bockwinkel was a guy who, again, is one of the most underrated and unknown great wrestlers who, when the AWA was done, he was done. He didn't go anywhere else except to show up as a figurehead in WCW, as one of the many guys that were like their GM. And, that was it. And you just can't beat it. To me, that's Hogan, Heenan, Shawn Michaels, the honorable mention, as I said. And you had so many. I mean, you're talking, Andre the Giant, Sergeant Slaughter, Greg Valentine, Tito Santana. The 1983 to 1984 was just a literal swap of letters from the AWA to WWF. And when Mean Gene Okerlund, as the voice of the AWA, became the voice of the WWF. And the rest is just history.
All right,
and
beautiful.
You can't say any more.
Those are your top three, and we've gone over them, so that's awesome. It's When Wrestling Goes Old School, man. That was awesome. It was an awesome episode. Verne Gagne, rest in peace. Want to say hello to everyone at 1WRESTLING.com. Andre Corbeil, Big Ray, Bill Apter. Professor, thanks for joining us. I think you'll be back several times over.
Oh, I would hope so.
And I hope so. It's my pleasure.
Mr. Schuyler, you want to give out your Twitter handle?
Absolutely. I am the show, Bill Schuyler. You could follow me at You Got The Show. That's DASHOW on Twitter. I will gladly get back to you. You message me, tweet me. I am very open when it comes to that. I guess we'll give our shout outs to the man himself, the icon, Bill Apter at Apter 1WRESTLING. You can also find him on YouTube at the Apter Chat, where he does interviews with everyone in the business, from Sammartino up to Dolph Ziggler today. He's got it all underhand. And for as Bill Apter, I have created a new drinking game where I punch in the network on any old pay-per-view, and every time Bill Apter shows up around ringside taking a picture, you take a drink, and guaranteed you'll be under the table before the end of that pay-per-view.
Well, now at least I know why you don't take my calls, because you're drunk all the time, because you've been looking at Bill Apter. Hey, listen, man, make sure you tune in to everything One Wrestling is offering on YouTube. They give reviews. NXT, TNA, WWE, Big Ray covers the pay-per-views. We got it all covered here, so tune in. Old School will be back. We'll do more shows for you. Next time we come on, we'll probably talk about Triple H. Hopefully, that'll be our next episode. Thank you for joining us here
King
on
of
OneWrestling.com.
True fraud, eh?
God bless everyone. We out. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. See you down the road.